Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Get comfortable and relax. Story 1. The Silhouettes in the Field. When I was 17 years old, I had one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. One that to this day, decades later, still gives me chills whenever I recall it. My then boyfriend Bob and I had driven out to a secluded farm access road, a place where teenagers would often go to hang out, get away from watchful eyes, or just enjoy some solitude under the stars. It was one of those roads that had only one way in and one way out, surrounded by vast open farmland. It was isolated and haunting in its stillness. That night, it was November, and while it wasn't particularly cold, the sky was thick with clouds, giving everything a muted, shadowed feel. I remember that I had my window rolled down just a few inches. Bob was smoking a cigarette while fiddling with the radio, trying to find something decent to listen to. The car was quiet except for the occasional static from the dial and the soft hiss of his cigarette. I was sitting cross-legged in the passenger seat, with my back pressed against the door, looking out over the empty fields. Harvest season had passed, leaving the landscape barren and lifeless, adding an eerie atmosphere to the night. And then, in the stillness, I turned my head and looked through the back driver's side window. That's when I saw them. 2 silhouettes. At first they didn't move. They looked like men, tall, broad and unmistakably human in form, but there was something deeply unnatural about them. Each one appeared to be holding something long and angular, and it wasn't difficult to guess what it might be. They looked like rifles. The way they carried them, the way they stood, everything about it suggested intent. But what made my heart truly drop was the moment they saw me looking. They didn't run or shout. They didn't wave or say anything to suggest we were mistaken or in danger. No, they simply moved. Quietly, swiftly, with strange coordination, they walked to the rear of our car and ducked down behind it, disappearing from my view. In that split second, everything inside me screamed that something was wrong. Very wrong. I should have heard footsteps. The gravel beneath our tires was coarse and noisy. With the window cracked open, any movement outside should have been clearly audible. But I heard nothing, not a single crunch of dirt or drag of a shoe. It was as if they floated. My reaction was instant and primal. I started locking the doors and screaming for Bob to start the car, my voice trembling with raw panic. At first, he thought I was joking, maybe playing a prank to spook him, but my tone, the rising hysteria in my voice, made him realize this was no joke. I screamed again, telling him there were 2 men out there and I was almost certain they had guns. His face changed instantly. The engine roared to life and he flicked the headlights on. Gravel spat out behind the wheels as he peeled off, sending dust into the air. I was so sure we'd see them in the red glow of the taillights, running after us, shouting, maybe even raising those rifles. But the road behind us was empty. Nothing. Just the swirling mist in the fields. When we finally reached the end of the access road, Bob stopped the car. His face was pale, his hands still gripping the wheel. He turned to me and asked what the hell that was all about. I tried to explain, but my words were coming out in panicked fragments. I told him exactly what I saw, the silhouettes, the weapons, how they had moved with eerie silence, how I was certain they were watching us before I noticed them. He listened, but looked skeptical. He'd been coming to that spot for years, he said. Nothing ever happened. No one had ever caused trouble, and the area was typically peaceful. I suggested maybe it was the farmer, perhaps with a friend trying to scare us off. But he shook his head. He knew the farmer. He told me there's no way he'd walk through fields at night, especially not without a flashlight. The farmer lived too far for that to be practical. Could it have been illegal hunters? I offered that next. But again, Bob shook his head. The land was posted with signs, no hunting. Plus, there were homes scattered along the main road leading to the access point. If anyone were firing off weapons in those fields, the sound would travel. Someone would call the police. And more importantly, if they were just hunters, why would they run and hide from 2 teenagers parked in a car? We were no threat. No authority, just kids. The more we talked, the more questions arose. None of it made any sense. Bob took me home that night. I was shaken to my core. For days I replayed the scene in my head, trying to find some rational explanation. Bob, having not seen them himself, never fully believed me. He was kind, but you could tell he thought I had exaggerated or maybe imagined it in the half-dark. But I know what I saw. I know it was real. We stopped dating not long after that. I think the experience unsettled him more than he let on. And maybe I scared him. Maybe seeing me so terrified made him realize how vulnerable we were, how close we might have come to something truly horrifying. Years have passed since that night. In fact, many decades have gone by. I'm now 62 years old, and to this day, I don't think I've ever felt that kind of raw fear again. Something was off about those men, or those things. I hesitate to even call them men anymore. They were darker than the night itself, as if they absorbed the surrounding darkness, solid but lacking detail. No, just outlines, silhouettes, moving in silence. Even their movements were wrong, jerky, unnatural, like puppets on strings. They made no noise, no breath, no shifting gravel, nothing. That silence haunts me more than anything. It was as if reality had glitched and something from beyond the veil had stepped through. For a long time, I never told this story to anyone. It just sounded too bizarre, too impossible. But then, years later, almost 4.5 decades after that night, I stumbled upon a forum on the internet, a place where people share unexplained encounters, and that's when I saw it. A story that almost mirrored mine. Different location, different circumstances, but the description of the figures was nearly identical. Tall, silent, shadowy, and always vanishing before anyone could truly confront them. That's when I knew I wasn't alone. Just for the record, we weren't drinking, we weren't smoking weed or doing any kind of drugs that might alter our perception. I was as clear-headed as I had ever been. I wasn't hallucinating, I wasn't imagining things. Did I somehow matrix the whole thing? Maybe. Maybe it was a hallucination brought on by some buried fear or anxiety, but I don't think so. I wasn't scared before I saw them. In fact, I was relaxed, calm. That fear only came afterward, and it was real. Kids always hung out in farmlands or the mountains back then. It was normal. I was one of them. But nothing I ever experienced, before or since, compares to that night. If you're wondering why I've chosen now to share this, it's because I've finally made peace with not knowing. I don't need answers anymore. I just need to speak the truth of what I saw. Maybe someone else has seen them too. Maybe they'll read this or hear it and realize they're not alone either. And maybe that's enough. Story 2. The Man at the Window. It was just last year. I was 15 at the time, and although I was still technically a kid, I had always been the kind of person who carried a deep sense of paranoia. Not the kind of irrational fear that makes you see monsters under the bed or hear whispers in the wind, but the quiet kind. The kind that makes you double-check the locks, leave a light on in the hallway, and sleep with something heavy beside your bed. Just in case. That's the kind of fear I had learned to live with, and it became especially intense whenever I was home alone. My parents weren't gone often, but when they were, that underlying nervousness would kick into overdrive. This particular night, I wasn't completely alone. I had a friend over. We were just 2 teenagers hanging out in the upstairs room, playing Xbox, eating snacks, and enjoying the freedom that came from being in charge of the house for a while. It was around 1 a.m. We hadn't eaten for hours, and the sound of our stomachs growling began to break the flow of the game. So, naturally, we decided to head downstairs to grab something to eat, and maybe grab a pop or 2 from the fridge. Before we left the room, I did something that might seem a little strange to someone who didn't know me. I grabbed a bat and a knife. My friend didn't even blink. He was used to this side of me. I always kept something nearby when I was home alone, even with someone else in the house. In my mind, being prepared was never a weakness. It was a survival instinct. We laughed about it, but I still clutched that bat as we stepped into the hallway. The hallway light switch was about 10 feet away, and we had to walk a good distance in the dark before we could flip it on. It felt like a cave, quiet, suffocating. When I reached the switch and flicked it on, the light filled the hallway and my heart settled just a little. That soft glow always made things feel safer. We continued our way downstairs, the bat still in my hand and the knife tucked nearby, and as we reached the base of the stairs, the darkness swallowed us again. The bottom floor was pitch black. No moonlight crept in from the windows, no glow from an electronic device hummed in the background. We bumped into chairs and furniture as we fumbled around looking for the light. My hand grazed the edge of the kitchen counter, then the cold metal of a drawer handle, and then, finally, the wall. I felt for the switch and flipped it on. The kitchen lit up with a dim yellowish hue, revealing the usual clutter of snack wrappers, a couple of empty cans, and our trusty fridge standing tall in the corner. I placed the bat and the knife on the kitchen table and opened the fridge door. My friend grabbed 2 cans of soda while I looked through the snacks, deciding between leftover pizza and microwave burritos. And then we heard it, a sound. Faint, rhythmic tapping, coming from the window about 15 feet across the room. We both froze. My friend turned to me, his eyes wide, and I instinctively reached for the bat. He picked up the knife with trembling fingers. We thought for a moment that it might be the neighbor, a 17-year-old guy named Dylan who had a weird sense of humor and occasionally tried to scare us when we were home alone. But the tapping didn't stop. It didn't change. It didn't speak or laugh or shift in tone like Dylan usually would. It just continued. A light tapping, deliberate, constant, unblinking. And then it happened. A loud bang against the glass, sharp and sudden, like a fist or a rock slamming into it. It echoed through the house and made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I felt the rush of adrenaline flood my system. I didn't need confirmation anymore. That was not Dylan. Without saying a word, we ran upstairs. We left everything behind, drinks, food, even the weapons. I don't even think our feet touched every step on the way up. We were that panicked. As soon as we reached the top of the stairs, I turned and slammed the door shut behind us, twisting the lock in one motion. My friend collapsed onto the carpet, panting, and I looked around, trying to figure out what to do next. Then I remembered the phone. The portable house phone. We kept it in the kitchen usually, but there was one in my room too. I ran to it only to find it dead, no charge. My chest tightened. I remember thinking that we were going to die. It felt like a ridiculous thought in hindsight, but at that moment it felt all too possible. We were 2 kids in a dark house with no easy way to call the police, and someone or something was outside watching. Then it hit me. My dad kept a handgun under his bed. I threw open my bedroom door, raced down the hallway, and didn't even bother turning on the light. I knew the layout by heart. I found the box under the bed, grabbed the keys from the dresser drawer, and bolted back into my room. My fingers were shaking as I unlocked it, but somehow I managed to get it open. I pulled out the pistol, loaded the magazine, and cocked it with a click that felt louder than anything else in the room. I turned toward the window, and that's when I saw him. There was a man standing just outside, partially obscured by the bushes. He wasn't trying to hide. He wasn't trying to speak. He was just standing there, watching, smiling. It was the kind of smile that didn't belong on a human face. Too wide, too cold. There was something in his expression that sent a bolt of dread through my spine. He saw the gun. I know he did. I was holding it directly in front of the window, pointed straight at him, trembling but firm. We shouted through the glass, telling him to get away, to leave before we shot him. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He just kept smiling. And then, slowly, without a word, he turned and ran into the woods. Just like that. I don't remember exactly how long we sat there afterward. Minutes, an hour. Time became a blur. Eventually, I told my parents everything, every detail. My dad, understandably shaken, called the police. and a few days later we got a call back. They had caught the man. He had broken into a home not far from ours and stabbed a woman who had been living alone. He was caught in the act, and while he was being interrogated, he confessed to multiple other crimes, including previous murders. He was, in the simplest and most terrifying terms, a killer. The police asked me to come in for a lineup. I identified him immediately. That face, the smile, there was no forgetting it. It was him. Afterward, my father did something he never thought he'd do. He bought me a firearm. He showed me how to keep it locked, how to access it quickly, and how to use it if, God forbid, it ever became necessary. I hope I never have to use it. I hope I never have to see that kind of evil again. But I'll never forget that night. I'll never forget the way the tapping started so softly, how it seemed almost innocent, almost ignorable, until it wasn't. I'll never forget the way the air shifted when we realized we weren't alone. The way fear becomes something real, tangible, how it lives in your breath, in your bones, in the space between heartbeats. It teaches you something about the world, about people, about what's hiding just outside your line of sight. It will be easy to brush it off, to say we were paranoid, that we overreacted. But then the truth rears its head and you realize just how lucky you were to have seen it for what it was, before it was too late. We didn't make the mistake of ignoring our instincts that night, and because of that, we're still here. Story 3, The Man with the Grin. It started like any ordinary evening, quiet, uneventful, one of those nights where the hours drift by in familiar rhythm. My girlfriend had gone to stay at her grandmother's house for the night, which was routine. Nothing seemed out of place. I dropped her off a little before sunset, gave her a quick kiss goodbye and told her I'd text her when I got home, just as I always did. It was our little ritual. A gesture that said, I'm safe, and also, I care. When I got home, I sent that message like I always did. Just a simple text, home, safe. I didn't get a response, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was talking to her grandmother, maybe she was busy, maybe she had fallen asleep. I shrugged it off. People get caught up. Not everything needs to be answered right away. But then, 20 minutes later, I got a call. And the voice on the other end wasn't the relaxed, sweet tone I knew so well. It was panicked, frantic. I could hear the tremble in every word. She was struggling to breathe as if she'd been running or crying, or maybe both. She was trying to explain, trying to find the words. All I could make out was that someone had tried to break into the house, that the police had just left, that everything was okay, kind of, but not really. I pressed her for details, gently, and she began to recount what had happened. Her grandmother had come home that night, a little later than usual, around 10:30 p.m. She had been at a church function and had picked up a few groceries on the way home. My girlfriend had gone out to the car to help her unload the bags. It was a quiet neighborhood, one of those places where people felt comfortable, leaving their doors unlocked and their porch lights off. The kind of place where danger seemed like something that only happened in movies or faraway cities. As she stood by the trunk, sorting bags and chatting casually with her grandmother, something changed. She felt it before she saw it. That strange, skin-prickling awareness that you're not alone, that someone is watching you. And then, there he was, a man, just standing there behind her. He hadn't spoken, he hadn't moved, he was just there, like he had materialized from the shadows. He was Hispanic in his early 20s, tall, lean, dressed in ordinary clothes that somehow made him look anything but ordinary. But it wasn't his appearance that terrified her. It was his smile, an enormous, exaggerated grin that stretched across his face, unnatural and unmoving. A grin that didn't match his eyes. They were empty, lifeless, watching, but not seeing. She screamed. Her grandmother, startled, looked up and then screamed too. They dropped everything, groceries scattering across the driveway, and bolted for the front door. Her hands fumbled with the keys, but she managed to get it open and they both tumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind them. They locked it, bolted it. Every light in the house came on. The phone was already in her grandmother's hand, dialing the police. Outside, the man didn't run. He didn't flee. He didn't shout threats or pound on the door. Instead, he calmly walked back to their car, leaned inside and started going through the bags. It was like he was searching for something, picking things up, examining them, tossing them aside, all while wearing that same grin, that fixed, eerie grin that had never once faltered. My girlfriend and her grandmother could only watch from behind the blinds, hearts racing, praying the police would arrive before something worse happened. He spent 5 minutes rummaging through their car before slowly making his way to the front door. He rang the doorbell once, then again, then began knocking, soft at first, then louder. He spoke through the door, his voice disturbingly calm. He claimed he knew them, said he just wanted to talk, said he'd been there before. All the while, the grin never left his face. He didn't shout. He didn't get angry. He just stood there, gently knocking, repeating himself like a broken record. And then something even stranger happened. He lay down, right there on the doorstep in front of the door. He curled up on the welcome mat like a dog waiting for its owner, eyes closed, smile still frozen on his face, and he went to sleep. That image haunted her more than anything else. The idea that someone could break into your world, terrify you to your core, and then just sleep, like nothing had happened, like he belonged there, like this was just another Tuesday night for him. It took the police less than 10 minutes to arrive, but those 10 minutes felt like hours. My girlfriend and her grandmother huddled behind the kitchen island, the cordless phone still clutched tightly, every creak of the wood outside sounding like thunder. When the flashing lights finally poured through the windows, relief came crashing in. The officers approached cautiously, unsure of what they were dealing with. When they found him lying there, he didn't resist. He simply sat up, that same grin on his face, and let them cuff him without a fight. While one officer began questioning the man, the others came inside to talk with my girlfriend and her grandmother. They gave their statements, their voices still shaky. And as they did, the man never stopped smiling, even from the back of the patrol car. Even as the doors were closed, he just turned his head to the side, eyes locked on my girlfriend through the window, and smiled. They drove him away, lights flashing in the darkness, and yet somehow that smile lingered long after the car had disappeared. She couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't either. What if they hadn't locked the door fast enough? What if the man had been more aggressive? What if he had been carrying something, a weapon, a motive? What if the police hadn't made it in time? There's something deeply unsettling about someone who doesn't need to shout or scream to scare you, someone who terrifies you just by being still, just by smiling. After that night, things changed. My girlfriend started double-checking every window, every lock. She didn't go outside alone after dark. Her grandmother began keeping a light on in every room, even during the day. The house never felt the same again. That illusion of safety, of peace, had been shattered. She would tell me later that the most disturbing part wasn't the moment she saw him, or the fear she felt, or even the threat of what might have happened. It was the eyes. The way he looked at her, not with rage, not with lust, but with something else entirely, something distant. As if she wasn't a person to him, as if none of it mattered, as if it was all just a game he'd played before and would play again. They say a predator doesn't see individuals, it sees opportunities, and that's what he was doing. Waiting, watching, smiling. Story 4. The nursing home and the visitor named Norma. When I was 18 years old, I got my first real job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I was hired as a nurse's assistant in a nursing home in my hometown. At the time, I was one of the youngest people on my shift, and while that sometimes made me the target of harmless pranks and teasing, I didn't mind. The job paid well, and more than anything, I genuinely liked being there. There was something about helping people who were nearing the end of their lives that felt deeply grounding. I wasn't just pushing wheelchairs and passing out medication. I was talking to people who had lived through wars, outlived loved ones, built careers, and carried histories in their memories that I could barely comprehend. One of the residents I came to know especially well was a woman named Norma. She was sharp-witted, spiritual, and incredibly kind. She always had a Bible with her, and she'd read from it often. I think she found comfort in the pages, the verses like old friends who stayed faithful as everything else faded. Whenever she needed something, whether it was a glass of water, help getting out of bed, or just someone to talk to, I was the one she called. The bond we had felt natural, like I had known her in another life. I looked forward to our talks, and I always made time for her, even on busy nights. Then, one evening, something changed. Norma began wandering the halls, clutching her Bible like it was a lifeline. She wasn't just walking, she was looking for something or someone. She had this wild, restless energy, and it scared some of the other staff. She tried to open the doors and get out. Once, she bit one of the newer aides who tried to lead her back to her room. Despite how erratic she became, she never acted out with me. I could calm her, speak to her softly, guide her back to her bed. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew something inside her was unraveling. Eventually, the nursing home administration made a difficult decision. Norma needed more help than we could give her. She was transferred to a specialized institution for patients suffering from advanced dementia and other cognitive disorders. Before she left, I sat with her in her room. I told her everything was going to be okay. I promised her that she wasn't being abandoned, that we'd see each other again. She smiled a little, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. And then she was gone. Weeks passed. The halls felt different without her. The energy she carried, even in her most chaotic moments, had left a quiet void behind. My boss called me into her office one day and told me that Norma had passed away. Kidney failure. It hit me harder than I expected. I grieved in my own quiet way, remembering our talks, her soft voice, the way she clutched that Bible like it was her last anchor. Time moved on. The room where Norma had once stayed was soon given to a new resident, an older woman named Anna. I hadn't had a chance to interact with her much. I had been off work for about a week, dealing with some personal matters, and when I returned, I was still easing my way back into the rhythm of the job. I hadn't even been down that hallway yet. One night, I was making my rounds, passing out cups of ice water to the residents, humming a little tune under my breath, when one of my co-workers rounded the corner. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and glassy. I stopped in my tracks, startled by the look on her face. "What's wrong with you?" I asked, forcing a light chuckle. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She didn't laugh. She swallowed hard and whispered, "I think I did." I rolled my eyes. "You're not getting me that easy." "No, seriously," she said. "The lady in Norma's old room, she just asked for you by name. She said she needs to tell you something." That stopped me cold. I hadn't spoken to Anna. She didn't know me. And I certainly hadn't told her anything about Norma. My co-worker didn't look like she was joking. And I could tell from her expression that this wasn't just some prank. Something had genuinely spooked her. Reluctantly, I agreed to go with her to Anna's room. I half expected to find her confused, maybe just misremembering something. But as soon as I walked into that room, the air changed. I can't explain it exactly, but it felt heavier, thicker, like something unseen was pressing down gently on the atmosphere. Anna looked up at me from her bed with a kind smile. "You must be the one she meant," she said softly. "Excuse me?" I replied. She motioned toward the chair in the corner of the room, the same chair Norma had always sat in when we talked. "I was speaking to a lady named Norma," she said. "She told me to tell you something." My breath caught in my throat. "She said to tell you she's back," Anna continued, "and that she misses you. She said she used to live in this room. She sat in that chair. She just wanted to come see you again. But when I got back from the restroom, she was gone." I turned to my co-worker expecting a smirk, a wink, anything to signal this was a joke. But there was nothing, just wide, fearful eyes. She hadn't told Anna to say this. She wasn't playing a trick. I excused myself from the room and stepped into the hallway. My hands were shaking. I told my co-worker it wasn't funny, that it was too soon, but she insisted again and again she had nothing to do with it, and I believed her. Later that week, I found out something else. Anna had arrived at the facility while I was away. I hadn't met her yet, hadn't spoken to her, but 2 days after she moved into that room, she started asking if she could speak to me, by name. Somehow, she knew who I was, even though we had never laid eyes on each other. I never went back to Anna's room after that. I swapped duties with other aides whenever I could. I avoided the hallway during evening shifts. I even had the schedule adjusted so that someone else would handle Anna's bathing needs in the mornings instead of evenings when I was there. It wasn't fear exactly. It was respect, reverence. A quiet acceptance that maybe some part of Norma had lingered behind. Maybe she had something more to say, or maybe she just wanted to say goodbye. In all my years working in that nursing home, I never experienced anything quite like that night. There were other odd moments, of course. Flickering lights, unexplained noises, a wheelchair that moved on its own once. But nothing like Norma, nothing so direct. So personal. I don't know what I believe about the afterlife. I wasn't especially religious back then. But I do know that not everything can be explained. Sometimes there are thin places in this world. Places where the veil between now and what comes after grows soft. Where love or longing refuses to let go. Norma may have passed from this life, but I like to think she came back, just once, to say that she remembered me, that our talks, our little shared moments, meant something to her too. Maybe she had waited for someone kind enough to listen again, and when she found Anna, she reached through the walls between worlds, just long enough to be heard. I'll never forget her. And I'll never sit in that chair again. Story 5. Quiet shadows in the hospital cafeteria. My first job wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a purpose. At 18 years old, I started working as a dietary aide in the cafeteria of a psychiatric hospital. It wasn't the kind of job you dreamed about as a child, but I was proud of it. I was just a teenager handing out food, collecting trays, cleaning tables, but it meant something to me. The patients looked forward to their meals. It gave structure to their days, and many of them in their own quiet ways appreciated the tiny sliver of normalcy that the cafeteria offered. There was something uniquely humbling about seeing how grateful someone could be for something so small. Just a warm tray of food and a kind smile. Some of them rarely spoke, some never made eye contact, but a few always said thank you, a few always smiled, and in a place like that, those little gestures could mean the world. Among the patients, one stood out. He wasn't like the others. He was around my age, maybe a year older at most, and his presence was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Everyone called him N. He was Chinese, and from the day he arrived he barely spoke a word. He didn't eat much. He never joined the others for group meals or movie nights. He didn't laugh at the staff's jokes or engage in the light-hearted banter that sometimes floated through the room. Instead, he would just sit there, alone, completely detached from the chaos around him. The first time I saw him, he was seated at the farthest table from the entrance. His head was slightly bowed, eyes fixed on some invisible point on the table in front of him. I brought his tray over and gently placed it in front of him. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even look up. Just sat there, perfectly still, as if I were nothing more than a passing breeze. I whispered a soft, "Enjoy," as I always did, then turned and walked away. I didn't take it personally. Patients here came with heavy baggage, and I understood that many of them existed in worlds far removed from the one I inhabited. It was about a month into my job that something happened, something I still think about to this day. It was movie night, and most of the patients had gathered in the recreation room to watch some family-friendly flick projected onto a white sheet on the wall. I was finishing up my duties in the cafeteria, cleaning trays, stacking dishes, wiping tables, when I noticed that N was still sitting at his table, alone, as always. The room was dimly lit, shadows clung to the corners, and the soft hum of the overhead lights was the only sound. I approached him, careful to keep my tone gentle. "Hey," I said, "you don't want to join the others for movie night?" He didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. I tried again, this time placing my hand lightly on the back of a nearby chair. "They're watching something funny. I bet you'd enjoy it." That's when he looked up. His eyes met mine for the first time, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. There was something hollow in his gaze, something unreachable. It wasn't sadness or fear, it was vacancy. The kind of emptiness that doesn't come from pain, but from something deeper, like his soul had been packed up and moved out a long time ago, and all that remained was a shell. We stared at each other for a moment, a long silent moment that stretched out like elastic, each second making me more uneasy than the last. I don't know why, but I started to sweat. My throat went dry. I realized I had been holding my breath. Then, without a word, he stood up. "Okay," he mumbled. His voice was barely above a whisper. Just that one word. Then he turned and walked out of the room, vanishing into the hallway that led toward the recreation area. I stood there for a moment, shaken, trying to collect myself. It wasn't until later that night that I learned more about him. One of the nurses approached me during my break. She had noticed my lingering discomfort and asked if I was okay. I mentioned the strange interaction with N, how unsettling it had felt. She sighed and looked down at her clipboard. "He suffers from severe schizophrenia and major depressive disorder," she explained. "He's been here for a while, tried college but couldn't cope. His condition spiraled. His family disowned him, not long after he was admitted." I swallowed hard. I couldn't imagine being left alone like that, abandoned not just by the world but by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. She continued, her voice low. "He hears things, sees things, voices that tell him to do things, things that are disturbing." I nodded silently, unsure of what to say. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way he had looked at me, those eyes, black as ink and just as endless. I wasn't afraid of him, not exactly, but I was afraid of what I had seen behind his eyes, or rather, what I hadn't seen. 2 days later, he was discharged. There was no ceremony, no goodbyes, just an empty chair at the table and a blank space where his tray used to sit. I didn't ask where he had gone. I didn't want to know. Part of me hoped he had found peace. Another part feared he hadn't. Months passed. The routine returned. New patients came and went. The cafeteria remained a place of fleeting smiles and soft conversations. But I never forgot N. Not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't do. He didn't scream. He didn't lash out. He didn't cry. He simply existed on the periphery, quiet and still, like a ghost drifting through the walls. I later found out that during his final days in the facility, he had begun speaking to himself more frequently, not in hushed mutters but in full conversations, animated, emotional, and at times aggressive. The staff kept logs of his outbursts. They noted the phrases he used, the violent suggestions he whispered to the air, the names of people that no one recognized. Some of the things he said were graphic, detailed, like instructions for something unspeakable. They said he never addressed me directly again after that night, but he had started saying my name during his episodes. That part stayed with me for a long time. I don't know where he is now. I don't know if he ever got better, or if the voices swallowed him whole. I hope he's okay, I truly do. But a part of me is also scared of running into him one day. Scared of hearing that voice again, scared of looking into those eyes and seeing something even darker than before. When people talk about horror, they think of monsters, of jump scares and creaking doors. But real horror, the kind that crawls under your skin and stays there, doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. It comes from the realization that the human mind, so fragile, so complex, can unravel in ways that defy reason. That someone can walk among us, look just like us, and yet live in a world so disconnected so dark that we can't even begin to understand it. I saw that darkness once, and I never want to see it again. Story 6, Hide and Seek and the Girl in the Closet. It happened 5 years ago, but the memory still lingers with a clarity that haunts me. I was 12 at the time, my sister was 14, and our little cousin, just 3 years old, was staying over for the weekend. It was one of those ordinary nights that sneak up on you with the promise of innocent fun and laughter, only to end in a way you could never expect. The three of us had spent the early part of the evening playing games, watching cartoons and laughing about the kind of things that only children find endlessly amusing. As the night wore on and the adults retreated to their own corners of the house, we decided to play hide and seek. It was our favourite game, and though our cousin was barely old enough to count past 10, we managed to convince her to be it for one round. She pouted a little at first. She always hated being the seeker, but after some playful nudging and a promise that we'd hide in easy spots, she agreed. My sister's bedroom was downstairs, tucked right at the foot of the staircase. It was the first room you'd see when descending from the main floor. Across the hallway from her door was a large storage closet, one that my father, in a twisted sense of humour, had always called the Devil's Room. It was a joke to him, of course, a way to scare us into doing our chores. If we didn't wash the dishes or clean up after ourselves, he'd threaten to make us sleep in the Devil's Room. As a kid, you never quite know how much of that to take seriously, but the name stuck. Even when we grew older, we still referred to it that way in whispers. To the right of the staircase stretched a long hallway with 2 more bedrooms, a small bathroom, and at the very end, the laundry room. That hallway always felt cold. No matter the season, a draft seemed to hover there, clinging to the walls and sliding along the floor. The overhead lights had a habit of flickering, and the sound of the washing machine always felt louder than it should be, like it echoed through the pipes and into the walls. Our cousin stood in the middle of my sister's bedroom, her small hands covering her eyes, counting in a sing-song voice. My sister decided to stay in the room, crawling beneath her bed with a quiet smirk of someone who thought she'd found the perfect hiding spot. I, on the other hand, crept down the hallway and slipped into the laundry room at the very end. I tucked myself behind the door, pressing into the corner, holding my breath. The game had begun. We waited. Through the walls, I could hear the faint creaks of the house settling, the soft hum of the refrigerator upstairs, and the occasional clunk of footsteps as our cousin searched. She moved slowly, her tiny feet making gentle thumps against the hardwood. We could hear her voice calling out, giggling softly, enjoying the thrill of the game, and then she stopped. We heard the creak of a door being opened. It was the closet, the Devil's Room. There was a pause, long enough to make me lean forward ever so slightly, and then, clear as day, I heard her say, "Angel, what are you doing?" My name, my cousin was calling for me. She laughed, a bubbly, innocent sound, and then said, "I found you, silly. You're not supposed to hide here." That laughter was short-lived. Within seconds, it transformed into a shrill scream, one that tore through the air and reached me like a jolt of electricity. My heart dropped. I bolted from the laundry room, sprinting down the hallway, my socks slipping slightly against the floor. By the time I reached her, she was trembling, her little hands clenched into fists, her face streaked with tears. I scooped her up without thinking and rushed into my sister's room. My sister crawled out from beneath her bed, confused, asking what happened. We tried to calm our cousin down, but she was shaking uncontrollably, her eyes wide, lips quivering. It took several minutes before she could speak, and when she did, her words were quiet, barely a whisper. "Angela wouldn't talk to me," she said. "She just looked at me and made an ugly face." My blood ran cold. I looked at my sister, and she looked at me, both of us frozen. I hadn't been in the closet. I had been at the opposite end of the hallway the entire time. My sister had never left her room. No one else had been playing the game. So, who had my cousin seen? We tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe it was a shadow or the dark playing tricks on her young eyes. But her expression said otherwise. Children don't lie like that, not when they're that scared. She hadn't made up a story. She had seen something, and she believed with every fibre of her being that it was me. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. We turned on every light in the house. We locked the doors. My cousin refused to sleep alone. She clung to me the entire night, curling into my side like a lifeline. I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the house, every distant hum, every rustle of wind against the window made me flinch. I couldn't stop picturing the look on her face, that fear, that confusion, that absolute certainty that someone had been in the closet pretending to be me. Days turned into weeks. We didn't talk about it much after that. My cousin thankfully seemed to forget about it, or maybe she buried the memory deep, the way children often do. But for me and my sister, it stayed. It became a shadow that followed us, especially when walking past that closet, especially at night. Then something strange happened. Over the next couple of years, other family members began to mention something odd. Not often, not directly, but enough to notice a pattern. They would say things like, "I thought I saw Angel walk past me upstairs, only to realize I had been downstairs the entire time." Or, "I could have sworn I just saw her in the hallway, even though I hadn't been home." The stories varied, but the thread was the same. A girl with pale skin, long dark hair, dark eyes nearly black, appearing where I wasn't. At first it was funny. A coincidence. Maybe they were just seeing things. But as it happened more, the humour faded, and the eeriness crept in. One of my aunts said she saw the girl standing at the top of the stairs late one night during a family party. She thought it was me, about to come down for dessert, but when she called out to her, the girl didn't move, didn't respond, just turned and walked into the darkness. She followed, confused. But when she got to the top of the stairs, the hallway was empty. Every door was open. Every room was silent. There was no one there. They say some places carry energy, memories that imprint onto the walls, the furniture, the floorboards. Some say that spirits return to where they once felt strong emotion, joy, pain, fear. And some believe that certain souls never leave at all, that they find a way to echo through time, taking on forms that make them seen, if not understood. I don't know what our cousins saw that night. I don't know what our family members glimpsed over the years. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe the human brain is just incredibly good at finding patterns, especially in dimly lit spaces and quiet houses. But something about that night, something about that game of hide and seek, felt like a turning point. After that, the Devil's Room was never just a closet again. Even now, long after we've grown, long after my sister moved out and the cousin grew older and forgot the details of that night, that house still holds its secrets. And I still remember the way she looked at me with those wide, tearful eyes and said, she made an ugly face. Whoever or whatever was in that closet that night, it wasn't me, but it looked like me. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still wonder if it's still there, waiting, watching, hiding just behind the door, in a place where children laugh and count and seek, not knowing that something may be hiding that doesn't want to be found. Story 7, The Night Watcher. It was supposed to be just another quiet night, one of those simple, uneventful evenings where nothing stands out, where time slows down and the hours roll by without consequence. A friend of mine had reached out, asking me to stay over for the night. She sounded a little anxious on the phone, her voice a few shades higher than usual, and there was a hint of fear behind her words. She didn't come out and say it at first, but eventually she admitted what was going on. She had a stalker, a man who had been following her around town, trying to get her attention, asking her out repeatedly, refusing to take no for an answer. She had done everything she could to shake him off, but he kept showing up, in the parking lot at her work, outside her gym, sometimes even walking behind her on the street. She lived with a roommate, but that night, the roommate was out of town. She didn't want to be alone. I wasn't her first call. She had other friends, guys in fact, who would have probably done a better job intimidating a stalker. but she told me she didn't feel comfortable asking them. She said she trusted me. And maybe that was what made me say yes. Maybe it was the look in her eyes when she asked. Or maybe it was something deeper, a quiet knowing that she was genuinely scared and needed someone, anyone, to be there. And so I agreed. I wasn't exactly your average protector. At the time, I was 5'6", lean and far from threatening looking, but I did have one thing most people didn't. I had training. I was a cage fighter, an amateur, but I had been doing it for years. I knew how to handle myself in a fight. People often underestimated me because of my size or gender, but I was no stranger to violence. In fact, I had been told more than once by therapists and psychologists that I had psychopathic tendencies. I didn't feel fear the same way other people did. Empathy didn't come naturally to me. And when someone crossed a line, my first instinct wasn't to retreat. It was to fight back, hard. I never saw it as a flaw. If anything, I saw it as a gift. I told her I'd stay the night, that she could rest easy and get some sleep. I'd keep watch from the living room. I'd keep an ear out. If anything happened, I'd be there. She nodded, still looking nervous, but clearly relieved. We ordered takeout, watched a movie, and eventually she went to bed. I sat on the couch, the room dimly lit by a single lamp, and waited. Hours passed. Midnight, 1 o'clock, then 2. The neighborhood was quiet. No cars passing, no dogs barking, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling. I leaned back against the couch, arms folded, one foot tapping softly against the hardwood floor. I was tired, but I stayed alert. I knew what kind of men stalkers were. I had read about them, fought them, studied their patterns. They were delusional, obsessive, and often dangerous, and they didn't stop, not until someone stopped them. At around 3 in the morning, I heard a sound, a faint scraping, like gravel shifting beneath a boot. Then another sound, metal clinking. I sat up. My entire body went still. The front doorknob was turning, slowly, carefully, like someone didn't want to be heard. I moved to the darkest corner of the living room, crouching low, silent as a shadow. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I waited. The knob jiggled again, then stopped. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of metal against metal. Someone was picking the lock. Adrenaline surged through me like ice. My heart didn't pound with fear. It surged with readiness. My mind raced through options, tactics, attack positions, and then the door creaked open. He stepped inside slowly, his silhouette framed by the streetlight behind him. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes, and he was holding something. A gun. My breath caught, not because I was afraid, but because I recognized him. I had fought him before. He was another amateur fighter, a contender I had squared off with in a local match once. He was strong, brutal, and in that moment I realized something horrifying. He must have seen my friend at that match. She had been in the crowd. He must have noticed her, fixated on her, and followed her ever since. I had unknowingly introduced a monster to her life. He didn't see me in the shadows. He moved silently across the room, heading toward the hallway where her bedroom door stood closed. I slipped behind him like a shadow, every movement silent and calculated. I knew that if I didn't act fast, if he got to her door, it would be too late. I grabbed the gun from behind, quick and precise. My fingers wrapped around the grip, yanked it backward, and before he could react, I unloaded the magazine, every round, right into him. The sound was deafening. My friend screamed from her room. I dropped the gun and ran to her, holding her as she sobbed. I told her it was okay, that it was over, that he was gone. There was a knock on the door moments later. I froze again. What if he wasn't alone? What if someone else was outside, waiting? But it was her neighbor. He had heard the shots and called the police. When the officers arrived, I told them everything. They asked questions. I answered calmly. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I was perfectly composed, like I'd just completed a chore. They said I wouldn't be charged. It was self-defense, open and shut. But that wasn't the end. A few weeks later, I was served with papers. The man's sister was trying to sue me for murder. She claimed I had executed him, that I hadn't given him a chance. But when the case went to court, the judge dismissed it immediately. She didn't have a case. There were witnesses, evidence. The man had broken into a home with a weapon. I had acted to protect someone. Still, I couldn't shake the weight of what I had done. I had fought dozens of men in cages, but this was different. I had taken a life, and even though I knew it had been the only choice, it haunted me. I stopped fighting after that. I walked away from the sport entirely. I moved in with my friend, partially to protect her, and partially to surround myself with someone softer, someone who reminded me of what I was fighting for. She was kind, gentle, forgiving, everything I wasn't. Being around her helped me feel human again. But there was one thing that kept bothering me. I started seeing his sister. Not frequently, not directly, but I'd catch glimpses of her at the grocery store, at the library, at the gas station, always at a distance, never approaching, just watching. Her eyes would lock onto mine, and then she'd turn away, disappear into the crowd. I don't know if it's coincidence. I don't know if she's watching me or if my mind is just projecting guilt. But I can't ignore the feeling that maybe this story isn't over. Maybe violence leaves behind echoes, shadows, things that don't die even when the body does. I don't regret protecting my friend. I would do it again without hesitation, but I've learned something about violence, that even when it's necessary, even when it saves a life, it leaves a mark, not just on the one who falls, but on the one who stands. And some nights, when the house is still and the darkness presses against the windows, I find myself listening, just in case. Because monsters don't always die when you shoot them. Sometimes they live on in the eyes of those who loved them. Story 8. The Campground Visitor. It had been a long year. Between the pressures of work, the endless screen time, and the grey pulse of urban life, I felt like I was dissolving into routine, like my body had kept moving but my spirit had slowly faded somewhere along the way. So when my best friend suggested a weekend camping trip, I jumped at the chance. We needed the detox. No phones, no screens, just the two of us and the wilderness. And for a while, that's exactly what it was. We chose a state park about 4 hours north, tucked between dense forests and winding mountain trails. It was the kind of place you didn't just stumble into, you had to want to be there. The drive was long, winding through stretches of pine and oak, past old bridges and forgotten towns. By the time we reached the campground, the sun was dipping low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. We set up our tent near a small creek, far enough from the trail to feel alone, but close enough to reach help if we needed it. There were a few other campers scattered along the stretch of trees, but they were quiet, respectful of the silence that hung in the woods. We built a fire, cooked canned chili, and sat back, watching the embers drift into the night air like glowing fireflies. It was peaceful, exactly what we had wanted. That night, I slept deeper than I had in months. No hum of traffic, no vibrating phone, just the sound of leaves whispering and water trickling a few yards away. But something pulled me from that sleep, something small and distant, yet unmistakable. It was around 3:30 a.m., the kind of hour where dreams fade and the world seems unnaturally still. At first, I thought it was an animal. I could hear faint crunching footsteps just beyond the tree line, slow, deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, straining to see through the mesh of the tent. My friend was still asleep, breathing softly beside me. Then came the sound of metal clicking, a latch maybe, or the soft jingle of keys. I held my breath. The footsteps came closer. They weren't heavy, but they weren't small either. They were measured, intentional, like whoever or whatever was out there knew exactly where it was going. I whispered to my friend, trying not to startle her. She stirred slightly, mumbling something, still half asleep. I reached over, slowly unzipped the tent's flap just enough to peek through. There was a figure standing about 20 feet away, just beyond the glow of the dying fire. They weren't moving, just standing, watching. They wore a long coat or jacket and a hood or hat that obscured the face. I couldn't make out any features, just the dark outline against the trees. I thought it might be another camper, maybe someone lost or confused, but something about the stillness of their posture unnerved me. People don't just stand like that, not in the middle of the woods at 3 a.m. I waited, watched. Minutes passed, and then they turned. Not quickly, not with surprise, but slowly, deliberately, like they had just finished watching whatever they had come to see. They walked away, disappearing into the trees without a sound. I stayed awake the rest of the night, clutching the small camping knife I kept in my bag. When the sun finally rose and the birds began to stir, I stepped outside, boots crunching against the cool earth. I walked over to where the figure had been standing. There were footprints, clear ones, heavy enough to press into the moss. But something was off. They didn't look like normal boots or shoes. The soles had an unusual pattern, round indentations along the edges, almost like a honeycomb. I couldn't place it. I didn't mention it to my friend. Not yet. I didn't want to ruin the rest of the trip. Maybe it had been a ranger doing rounds, or another camper out for a midnight walk. Maybe it was nothing. But that night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the tent, listening to every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, and at some point around the same time, 3:30 or so, I heard the steps again. Farther away this time, but still distinct, still moving with that slow, unnatural rhythm. I didn't look out. I didn't want to see. I just listened. In the morning, I found something new. A single pine cone, placed carefully on the edge of our fire pit. Not tossed, not fallen, but placed. Upright, balanced. I know it sounds small, insignificant, but I had cleared that area the night before. There was no way it had been there by accident. That day, we hiked. We tried to pretend everything was normal. I joked about bears and raccoons, about how nature always has its quirks. My friend laughed, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She had heard the sounds too, even if she didn't say it. On the third night, we decided to leave the fire burning longer. We hoped the light would keep animals or people away. We sat close, wrapped in jackets, our backs to the tent, watching the flames flicker and dance. The woods were still. Too still. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the fire suddenly sputtered, like a wind had passed through, only there was no wind. The air had gone thick and heavy. The trees seemed to lean in closer. And then, we heard it, a whisper, faint, barely audible, not words, just the tone, like someone exhaling a secret from behind a tree. We turned at the same time, eyes scanning the darkness, and there, just beyond the reach of the fire's glow, was the figure again, standing in the exact same place, no movement, no sound. We didn't wait this time. We grabbed our gear, doused the fire, and retreated into the car. We locked the doors, started the engine, and stayed there until dawn. When morning came, we packed everything in silence. There was nothing left to say. Before we left, I walked one last time to the edge of the clearing where the figure had stood. There was something on the ground, a strip of black cloth frayed at the edge, and beneath it, half buried in the dirt, was a small silver coin. Not American, not any currency I recognized. The coin had a strange symbol etched into one side, an eye inside a triangle, surrounded by jagged lines. On the back, there were no numbers, no letters, just a perfect circle carved into the center. I left it there. I didn't want to take anything from that place. We drove home in silence, the forest shrinking behind us in the rearview mirror. My friend eventually moved across the country. She never went camping again. I I've been back to the woods since, but never to that spot. Something followed us that weekend. Not physically, perhaps, but in memory. In presence. To this day, I still wake up at 3:30 IOM sometimes, heart pounding, ears straining, and I listen, because I'm not entirely sure we were ever alone out there.